guys noticed this or not, but in the Godzilla x Kong movie, there was an absolutely ginormous monster that we don't really know who it is, or who it was anyways. It was basically a giant skull and a giant spine. We're gonna be breaking it down today and seeing if we can figure out who it is. And we're gonna be doing that in a video titled The Mega Titan Skeleton Explained by Goji Center. Shout out to him.
One of the biggest and most eyebrow-lifting
it was definitely the biggest
Godzilla Kong was the reveal
creature
of what
we've
could
ever
have
seen.
possibly been
But it was
the
just the
biggest,
skull.
heaviest, longest, and tallest monster of all time.
Like I said, I don't know if you noticed it,
aren't talking
but they
about
crossed
Ghidorah.
the bridge.
We aren't talking about Shimo, and no,
And it
we
wasn't
aren't
the
even
bridge.
talking
It
about
was,
this animal with the enlarged
it was an animal.
skull. We are, in fact, talking about a bigger
A lot bigger than that.
Nope, larger than that. Bigger.
Keep
Come
going.
on, now blow it up.
That's about right.
That's about right.
Well, there
yes,
you go.
there is
That's
a
about
whole
right.
lot to talk
Yeah,
about
was
in
that
this
right there?
episode, but first, make sure you're subscribed to
When
not
they crossed
miss
that
any of our
bridge?
upcoming GXK Explained
Hey, yo, like you said,
episodes.
by the way, if you haven't
The
yet, hit
first
that
thing
subscribe
comes to
button.
mind when viewing this overly large skeleton is
Look at that
how
thing.
big is this thing?
It is
First
huge.
revealed in one of the GXK trailers.
You know how
most
big
people
Kong
were
is.
waiting to see
Look
the
at that.
film to see if there was in fact some explanation that shed some light on this mysterious corpse.
I was
This
so surprised
skeleton
to see
in
that.
This film would serve as a bridge connecting two landmasses that were
Like, what
divided
was
by
that?
a river of lava that carved out a canyon over a very long time. Unfortunately,
Mega
we
War
didn't
Bat?
get much information about
It
this
kinda
thing
looks
in the
like
film,
one.
but we do get a very small bit of info in the novel.
I don't know.
Before we reveal this, let's first take this skeleton and try to figure out a very rough estimate of the size of this skeleton. We'll start
Ginormous.
with
You
the
know how big
skull.
Kong is.
The book says that the head alone of this thing was much larger than Kong.
Oh, wait,
and
the book
film
explains
does show
it?
this really well. But we want more detail. To show how large this skeleton really is, we took the liberty to make a rough estimate using Kong's body as a reference and laying his silhouette flat against the surface area of this skull.
Solid idea.
The result
I like
being
that.
Kong's entire body height can be laid around 5 times along the length of this skull.
That's
making
crazy.
This at least a whopping 1,685 feet in length.
Just the
And
skull, by
that's
the way,
just
almost
the head.
1,700 feet.
That's right, folks. This astronomically large skeleton has a skull that is bigger than every single kaiju we have ever seen in the Monsterverse.
Yeah, just
For
the
reference,
skull.
here's Godzilla next to the skull. Coming up is Titanis Kong.
What about Shimo?
Still not impressed?
'Cause she's
How
bigger
about
than all of them.
Monster Zero. And we can add a speculative size of Shimo while we're at it. For shits and giggles, we can add
That's
Teenager Kong
crazy.
from 1973.
Teenage
Note how
Kong.
the fangs of this kaiju greatly surpass the size of this ape, rivaling that of
Wow.
adult Kong also. But there's a lot more to cover about this animal. Miles more.
Miles
That
more.
wasn't
That's
a joke.
insane. Yeah.
So
That's not a
yes,
joke.
we settled that the skull alone was longer and bigger than any Monsterverse kaiju.
I'm like
But
super
what about
interested
the
in this.
length? The
Let me know
best unit
anything
of
that you
measurement
guys
we
might,
have here
you know,
is Kong
might think of,
himself,
too.
who is standing on top of
Maybe
this
you might know
skull.
who it is.
Given that he is 337 feet in height, we'll multiply his silhouette many times along the
Imagine what the
visible length
monster
of this
looks like to
skeleton.
us.
Accounting for the distance, making his silhouette slightly smaller as the image gets farther away, we can
That is
count approximately 52 units. And if we do the math, we get an earth-shattering number of 17,524 feet. That is 3.32
17K?
miles, or a little over 5.34 kilometers. We'll give you a second to soak that in. But some of
Yeah,
us
I
are
need a
visual
second.
learners, so
That is
we've
insanity.
got you covered. The tallest building in the world right now at the time of the release of this
Burj
episode
Khalifa.
is the Burj Khalifa,
Yup.
2,717 feet in height. That means this skeleton is 6.5 times longer than the tallest
can't even
building on
fathom
Earth.
that.
Want a more vast example? Note that the deepest part of the ocean is around 7 miles deep. Fully stretched, this skeleton would take up more than 47% of this depth. So whatever animal
terrifying,
this was
actually.
could basically swim to the bottom of this vast pit in
And you gotta
just
think,
a
that's
few
just the
seconds,
skeleton.
only because
Like,
it
how
was
big was the
that
actual body?
large. Oh, and this size only accounts for what is visible in this image.
Right,
There's a
it could
small
be
chance
scattered.
that the tip of this tail could have extended even further. To continue understanding the size of this creature, we'll move on to the very first image that was released of this skeleton, the rib cage. Note how both
The
Kong
rib
and
cage is
Zuko
huge,
looked
too.
extremely small when walking along
See,
the
that's what I'm
spine of this
saying.
skeleton. But
Like,
how
we're only
tall
seeing
are those
the
things?
bones and stuff
Again,
like that.
thanks
We're
to
not
the
seeing
presence of Kong in this footage, we can
any
use
type
him
of
as the
body.
unit of measurement and multiply his silhouette approximately 4 times along the length of the longest rib here, approximately 1,348 feet in height. To explain how
That
large
is
this thing is, imagine
insane,
standing
dude.
near the Empire State Building in New York City. A
And
ribbed
that's how
skull would
big it
stand
would
at
be.
around this
Not long,
height,
it's how big.
surpassing the overall height of the building itself, only barely surpassed by
And
the
that's
tip.
like if it just
But
had
this
no meat
brings
on
up
its
another
bones.
fun thing to point
You know?
out: the length of the head.
That's terrifying.
Oh yeah, it seems as if this animal may have had an enlarged head after all.
And
Since
what
the
killed it?
overall length
Like,
of this
what-
head was more than 5
That's what I'm
times the
thinking
height
now.
of Kong, standing this skull next to this Empire State Building would lay bare how massive this skeleton really is.
That's crazy.
All in all, the space inside this ribcage would possibly even be wide enough for Ghidorah to comfortably walk in between this massive ribcage if
And
it
you
was
know
on
how
the
big
ground.
Ghidorah is.
But this wasn't the only time we've witnessed big rib cages like this. Moving ahead in the film, we find
we
that in
didn't
the
see
Great
that one,
Apes
but I don't
lair,
think it was
there
that
are
big.
also remains of these same skeletons, as we see here, dwarfing every single life form found here, and yes,
Or maybe it
even
was.
Shimo. Even the Playmates figure pack features these enlarged ribs as additional accessories. So does the book tell us anything about these remains?
I haven't read the book. Let me know in the comments if you guys have read the
But it does
book.
confirm that these were in fact living creatures. Previously, we discussed the small
I just watched the
possibility
movie.
that
I'm a
these bones
movie
were
goer.
carved
I'm not a
by the
big
great
book
apes
guy.
and served as a bridge.
Books are
only
cool,
because
though.
of the fact that this thing seemed too large to fit in this cinematic universe. The book says otherwise, confirming that these actually used to exist at some point in time and for some reason died out.
But what is it?
Interestingly, this is not the
Oh,
first
so
time
they
we
just
actually
died
see
out, and
crazy
nobody
large
killed them,
skeletons
obviously.
just lying about. No, we aren't referring to this one. We're actually talking about a bigger one, somewhat similar to this skeleton here.
There was a bigger one in a
the
previous
animated
movie?
Netflix
Oh,
series
animated.
Skull Island, we see a strangely similar skeleton laying in the desolate terrain in a certain location in Skull Island. Similar to this image, these oversized
watch all of
ribs
Skull
would
Island,
stick
the
out of the
anime.
ground. Additionally, the skull of this animal somewhat resembles the one in GXK.
It does, but it's
There
definitely
is one
smaller.
last and perhaps the most
lot
important
smaller.
question to answer. What did these things look like? We already
That's
got
what we need to
confirmation
know.
in the book that these at some point were extremely large animals. We aren't given a name,
Yeah, we can
and
see
we
that.
probably won't be seeing these creatures in their living form anytime soon. The best we can do is reconstruct this animal with what we already have. To
Bet.
start,
We about
let
to
us
see?
begin with the posture. Given its large head
I'd
and
say
the
it
fact that
has
its
to look
shoulder
something
blades
like
are
a
very
warpath.
close to the
Has
head
to.
and hips far down along the
Maybe
length
not
of
with
its
the
body,
wings. I
we
don't
can
know.
assume the animal had a rather low posture, similar to a lizard. More evidence to support this is the presence of a very long tail, almost the same size and possibly longer than its actual body. But something seems lacking. Where are the legs? Well, if you look closely, you'll see that the remaining bones are over here.
I didn't even
Perhaps
see
the great
those.
apes, after running into the corpse of this giant skeleton, positioned it to better bridge these two landforms, moving the
So it
legs
had
aside,
legs? It's not
leaving
even a
the skull
warpath.
of this
It's more
creature
like a
here,
skull crawler.
using the fangs to keep it anchored to the ground for it to prevent slipping, and the weight of the rest of the body bearing down on the ground, keeping the ribs
Nah,
and
bro.
vertebrae suspended, serving as a bridge.
Wait a
So
minute.
far, we've
This
hinted
just
at this
changed my
thing
thought.
probably being of reptilian appearance based on the skeletal anatomy of its body.
It would look
However,
like that?
The skull of this animal also resembles that of a mammal. Given that some titans do seem to resemble hybrids of animals of completely different classes, it's not too far-fetched to think that this one in particular may have shared attributes of both mammal and reptile. Here on Goji Center, we
That
took
is
the liberty to try
insane.
to recreate one of many possible ways this animal could have looked like based on what was previously discussed. The first thing you're going to notice is the fact that this creature may have had some luminescent elements.
Might look like that.
Why?
That- bro,
the
nah.
caloric intake of these colossal titans would have
That
been
would be
so
able to
much
beat
to the point
anybody.
that it would be unsustainable. In no time, the entire Hollow Earth ecosystem would have been drained of vegetation or other prey to keep these things alive.
Right.
So the other
Probably
more
why it's a
plausible way to
skull
keep
now.
these things alive would
Just
be
a
by
skeleton.
absorbing radiation. Similar to many titans like Godzilla, Ghidorah, Scylla, etc. Radiation plays a vital role in the sustenance of these creatures.
That's facts.
Therefore, it's only reasonable for these creatures to feed on radiation.
Imagine
Since
how
there's
much
plenty of
radiation that
down here
thing would
and
have to
not
eat.
enough food on the planet to keep these things alive.
Yeah, there
for a
just
long
wasn't
enough
enough
time.
food. They died
This
out.
may also be an explanation of why these creatures die. Crocodiles, who, by the way, have a somewhat similar skeletal anatomy to this one.
Bruh,
age
imagine
very
if it looked like a
slowly, and most of
crocodile,
the
but
time
that
die
big.
of disease, predation, habitat loss, but almost never from aging. That's because they go through a phenomenon known as negligible senescence, which is when an organism
What
does
is
not
that?
exhibit any evidence of biological aging, which is why you see animals
That's kinda
like
crazy.
tortoises and big crocodiles live for a very, very long time.
Hey,
These
I want
guys
what they got.
usually
I'm
die
not
of
trying to
stuff
look like I'm
other
80.
than
I'm trying to look
aging.
like I'm
So,
20
back to
when
our
I'm
big
80.
skeleton, these
Give me
guys
some of that.
probably died out due to their bodies being so large that the radiation intake was not enough to keep these guys functioning. At some
Not
point
enough
during their lives,
radiation,
their
man.
energy intake began to be unsustainable, causing them to, in a way, starve of radiation and then proceed to die.
That's a
Since,
solid
to be honest,
theory, I
these
think.
things are way too big to be hunted down by anything
Facts.
that we know of.
Stop.
The existence, appearance, and fate of
Imagine they
these
bring in
creatures will
another one.
remain a mystery until more information and canonical material is released. These were once powerful
It is a big
creatures,
mystery, but I mean,
the fact
that's
remains
not a
that
bad
the
theory
Titans,
there.
the great apes, and
Not a
other
bad theory
megafauna
at all.
ended up being the ones who prevailed in the Hollow Earth.
But let me know any theories or any thoughts you guys have on what in the world that giant monster was. Thank you for watching with me. I will see you guys tomorrow. I love y'all. Goodbye.